getting involved in Bruce's philosophies and Bruce's beliefs help scare away all the fears that come into actually portraying a legend.
When Jason Scott Lee was cast as the legendary martial artist in the 1993 blockbuster Dragon, The Bruce Lee Story, it was more than just a career-defining role. It was a test of everything he had. The world expected perfection. He wasn't just playing a man. He was stepping into the skin of a global icon whose speed, power, and presence bordered on mythical. Behind the cameras, the transformation was brutal. Endless training, shattered limits, and the constant fear of falling short. What looked effortless on screen was forged in sweat, pain, and an unbreakable will to honor a legend. Now, after 3 decades, Jason has finally broken his silence, revealing what it really cost to become Bruce Lee. A role that almost never happened. Jason Scott Lee never set out to play Bruce Lee. In fact, the role that would define his career wasn't something he pursued. It found him. In the late 1980s, Jason was just another young actor trying to carve out a place in Hollywood. Born in Hawaii to Chinese and Hawaiian parents, he had landed a few minor roles in films like Back to the Future Part 2 and Ghoulies 3, but nothing that moved the needle. His first real shot at a breakout came when he auditioned for The Last of the Mohicans. He believed it was his stepping stone, a chance to prove he could carry something bigger. But the opportunity slipped away, not because of talent, but appearance. The Mohican advisor on the film said, "He doesn't look quite Mohican enough," Jason recalled. "My heart sank. I wanted that part so badly, and just like that, it was gone." What Jason didn't know was that someone in the room had taken notice. Casting director Bonnie Timmerman had watched his audition closely and quietly held on to his name. Months later, when producers were searching for someone to play Bruce Lee in Dragon, The Bruce Lee Story, Timmerman remembered Jason and brought his name to director Rob Cohen. It was a long shot. Jason wasn't famous, and portraying Bruce Lee, a global legend, was a responsibility few dared to take on. Still, Cohen was curious. He didn't wait for agents or formalities. He picked up the phone and called Jason directly. "I had no idea what was coming," Jason said. "Rob Cohen just called me out of the blue and said, 'We're making a film about Bruce Lee, and we think you might be right for the role.'" My jaw dropped. I said, "I'm freaking out a little." Jason wasn't exaggerating. The idea of stepping into Bruce Lee's shoes was terrifying. The pressure was immediate, so overwhelming that he didn't even read the script. Days passed, then a week. Finally, Cohen called again. Jason was honest. I told him, "Sorry, I haven't read it. I'm still trying to decide if this is a good idea." Cohen asked, "What are you afraid of?" Jason didn't pause. "I'm afraid of making the biggest mess of myself before my career even begins." The hesitation ran deeper than nerves. "He was such an idol of mine and such a dynamic individual," Jason explained, referring to the martial arts legend behind The Big Boss and Enter the Dragon. "I didn't know how I could be this person. I'm always really honest with myself, maybe too much so." And I told them, "I think you've got the wrong guy." Rob said, "You know what? Just because you answered that way, we think we have the right guy," Jason recalled. That fear didn't go away. In fact, it followed him through every day of production, right up to the edge of collapse. Breaking down before breaking through. While preparing for Dragon, The Bruce Lee Story, Jason Lee found himself facing an overwhelming and unexpected transformation. At the time, he wasn't yet a martial artist, far from it. To portray the legendary Bruce Lee on screen, he had to completely rebuild himself from the ground up, both physically and emotionally. The demands were staggering. The weight of honoring Bruce Lee's legacy, the pressure from the film studio, and the personal expectations he placed on himself all began to crush him. "I had an emotional breakdown while I was training," Jason later admitted. "Everything was too heavy, you know? It was so much pressure and I just fell apart." The breakdown wasn't dramatic in a cinematic sense. It was quiet, isolating, and terrifying. Jason was paralyzed by fear. His body refused to move forward. His mind shut down. For a full week, he couldn't bring himself to train, rehearse, or even think clearly. "I couldn't do anything for a week," he said. "I was just flattened. Looking back now, I can laugh about it. But when I was in the middle of it, it felt like my whole world was collapsing." He began to question everything. Could he even finish the film? Was he capable of honoring the legend without falling apart? What if he failed so badly that the movie itself would become a joke, and worse, that he would become the joke? All I thought was, I'm going to be the one that everyone mocks. Behind the scenes, few people knew how deep Jason's struggle had become. The public saw a determined young man stepping into the shadow of a martial arts icon, but inside, he was falling apart. He didn't just fear for the film, he feared for his career, for his reputation, and even for his identity. He wasn't just acting, he was reliving a story that already held deep emotional wounds. The turning point only came when someone close to Bruce offered to guide Jason through the darkness. Guided by Bruce Lee's inner circle, Jason Scott Lee's transformation truly began when he entered the world of Bruce Lee's closest disciples. His breakthrough came during intense martial arts training under Jerry Potit, one of Bruce Lee's original students, and among the few personally certified in Jeet Kune Do. At the time, Jason was searching for more than physical skill. He needed a deeper connection, someone who could unlock not just Bruce's movements, but his spirit. Jerry became that person. He didn't just pass down techniques, he carried Bruce's legacy in its rawest, most human form. Jerry used to tell me what most people didn't know about Bruce was how much he suffered, Jason recalled. He'd say, "Everyone sees the power and the speed, but they don't know the cost." According to Potit, Bruce often pushed his body beyond its limits. He would train with such intensity that he'd spend days bedridden, physically wrecked by the demands he placed on himself. He pushed so hard he was constantly laid up, Jason said. That version of Bruce, vulnerable, flawed, but relentlessly driven, was a revelation. It wasn't the invincible icon Jason had idolized as a child. It was the real man behind the myth. Jerry kept drilling it into me, Jason said. Bruce didn't quit. He couldn't. That's what you need to carry into this role. The refusal to give up. One training moment made it all click. We were working on empty hand techniques when Jerry suddenly did this move. So explosive, so precise. It shocked my entire nervous system, Jason said. It wasn't just speed. It was like something hit me at a cellular level. I asked him, "What the hell is that?" And he just said, "That's Bruce Lee." Jason didn't doubt him. That's exactly what I saw in those films I watched over and over as a kid. As the sessions deepened, the training evolved. It wasn't just about choreography or form anymore. It was about transformation, mental, emotional, spiritual. Something shifted in me, Jason said. It wasn't just about the fight scenes. It was about discipline, pain, resilience, and most of all, being honest with yourself. But even after finding that physical and spiritual connection, one thing was still missing: emotional validation. And that came from Bruce Lee's own family. Earning the family's blessing. Before anything could truly move forward, Jason Scott Lee knew he needed more than just technical training or studio approval. He needed the blessing of Bruce Lee's family. It wasn't about seeking permission in a formal sense. It was about earning trust, stepping into sacred territory with the respect it demanded. He began with a few phone conversations with Bruce's widow, Linda Lee Cadwell, before filming began. Those early talks were encouraging. She was kind, open, and curious about the man chosen to portray her late husband. But as personal as those calls felt, nothing could match what happened on Jason's very first day at Universal Studios. Still unfamiliar with the lot and unsure where to report, Jason wandered through a maze of plain studio buildings, trying to find someone who could direct him. By chance, he stepped into a modest, nondescript office. Inside, a blonde woman crouched over several old cardboard boxes, quietly sorting through what looked like personal belongings. Without knowing who she was, Jason asked for directions to Rob Cohen's office, assuming she might be an assistant. Instead, the woman stood up, smiled warmly, and introduced herself. It was Linda Lee Cadwell. The moment hit him hard. He hadn't expected to meet her so soon, and certainly not like this. She hadn't come to simply observe the early stages of production. She came carrying Bruce's history. The boxes were filled with mementos from Bruce's life: clothing, accessories, and personal artifacts he had worn, used, or cherished. Her intention was to assist the wardrobe team and production designers in bringing Bruce's world to life with accuracy and reverence. Jason was moved, but he hesitated to touch anything. Growing up in Hawaii, he had been taught the idea of mana, the belief that objects can carry spiritual energy, and those items, he later said, were undeniably powerful. They held more than historical significance. They carried weight. It was like standing in the presence of something sacred, he would explain. Some things are better honored without being handled. But the emotional significance of the role didn't end there. Not long after meeting Linda, Jason was introduced to Bruce Lee's son, Brandon Lee. Brandon had once been offered the chance to portray his father in the same film, but had turned it down. perhaps out of caution, or perhaps because the legacy was too personal to reenact. Still, he was protective of how his father would be remembered, and curious about the man who would now take on that responsibility. The two arranged to meet at Mr. Chow, the iconic restaurant in Beverly Hills. Jason arrived unsure of what to expect. A quiet dinner, maybe small talk, but Brandon arrived in full force. He pulled up in a flashy sports car, full of charisma and energy. From the start, he was animated, expressive, almost theatrical in his presence. At one point, he launched into a monologue at the dinner table, speaking as if he were performing on stage. It was disarming, but deeply human. Despite the outward bravado, Jason could tell Brandon was measuring him, not out of distrust, but out of care. The role meant something. The man it represented meant even more. Somewhere between the laughter and the theatrics, Brandon offered one powerful piece of advice that Jason never forgot. Don't try to be Bruce Lee, just be true to yourself. That moment stayed with Jason throughout the entire production. It gave him room to breathe, a kind of emotional permission to stop chasing perfection and instead aim for authenticity. Combined with Linda's quiet strength and her willingness to share Bruce's personal world, Jason left those early encounters not just with a blessing, but with a responsibility. He now carried more than a role. He carried a legacy, one guarded by the people who knew Bruce best. And from that point forward, every step he took on set was grounded in their trust. The on-set struggles no one saw. Despite the support and blessings, not everything went smoothly behind the scenes of Dragon, the Bruce Lee story. In fact, the production was often intense, exhausting, and emotionally draining for many of those involved, especially for Jason. From the beginning, Jason faced pressure on multiple fronts. He wasn't just playing a role, he was stepping into the shoes of Bruce Lee, a global icon and cultural legend. That responsibility weighed heavily on him, and it shaped how he approached the performance. He didn't want to simply mimic Bruce's moves or deliver a stylized version of his story. Jason wanted to capture who Bruce was as a person, the struggle, the passion, the humanity behind the myth. But not everyone on set shared that same vision. Director Rob Cohen had a different perspective. He wanted the film to have a bigger, more cinematic scope. He saw Bruce Lee's story as a modern myth, something larger than life, almost legendary. That approach sometimes clashed with Jason's more grounded, personal interpretation. Rob wanted the film to be more cinematic, more mythic, Jason later explained. And I was really trying to honor the human side of Bruce. I didn't want to play a statue. The tension between actor and director wasn't rooted in personal conflict. It wasn't hostile, but the creative friction was real. There were also challenges with the physical demands of the role. The fight scenes were grueling. Choreography had to be perfect, and expectations were sky high. Everyone on set was under pressure to perform and get every move right. As a result, tempers sometimes flared. Jason recalled moments when the intensity spilled over into frustration. He occasionally found himself clashing with fellow cast members, not because of animosity, but because the stakes felt so high. "We were pushing so hard," he said. "Everyone had something to prove. Sometimes it boiled over." One particular scene stood out. During a high-stakes fight sequence, another actor missed his cue and accidentally struck Jason in the face. It wasn't intentional, and Jason knew it. But after weeks of stress and little rest, the moment hit a breaking point. "It wasn't his fault, but I was already on edge," Jason admitted. "I had to take a breather. I walked off set and just sat on the floor of my trailer in silence." The emotional toll of the production went beyond the set. Jason kept a journal during filming, a private record of the pressure he was under. Many entries were filled with doubt, loneliness, and sleepless nights. The weight of portraying Bruce Lee and doing it justice never left him. "There were nights I didn't sleep at all," he wrote. "I'd lie there thinking, what if I ruin Bruce's legacy?" Despite all of this, the creative disagreements, the physical exhaustion, and the emotional burnout, Jason never gave up. He stayed committed to the work. He poured everything he had into the role, even when he wasn't sure if it would be enough. He didn't know if audiences would accept his portrayal or reject it. He didn't know if he was honoring Bruce Lee or falling short. All he could do was trust the process and keep moving forward. Then, the film was released, and what happened next stunned even the most optimistic voices behind the project. A legacy sealed in the public eye. When Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, hit theaters in 1993, it did more than just meet expectations. It surpassed them in almost every way. Originally viewed by some as a niche biopic or a risky tribute, the film became a surprise box office success. It earned over $63 million worldwide, far more than many industry insiders had predicted. For Universal Pictures, it was an unexpected win. For audiences, it was something else entirely. A powerful, emotional reintroduction to one of the most influential martial artists of all time. At the center of it all was Jason. Critics praised his performance as intense, vulnerable, and deeply human. He didn't just impersonate Bruce Lee, he brought the man to life. Reviewers from the New York Times to Variety highlighted Jason's ability to balance Bruce's public persona with his inner struggles. Audiences saw not just a martial arts master on screen, but a husband, a father, and a man fighting to define his own identity. But what really set his performance apart was the emotional weight he carried. Behind the fight scenes and high-energy sequences was a portrayal grounded in loss, ambition, and cultural pressure, themes that deeply resonated with audiences around the world. The public reaction was swift and overwhelming. Fan mail poured in from every corner of the globe. Some shared how the film helped them reconnect with their Asian heritage. Others said it inspired them to take up martial arts. The film didn't just succeed commercially, it created a lasting emotional impact. It introduced Bruce Lee to a new generation, many of whom were too young to remember his films firsthand. Through Jason's performance, they discovered Bruce not just as a screen icon, but as a flesh-and-blood man with dreams, fears, and flaws. That appreciation hasn't faded. In fact, it's only grown stronger over time. Decades after the film's release, Jason still sees messages online from fans around the world. On Instagram, YouTube, and fan forums, people continue to express how much the film meant to them. To this day, Jason said, I still see comments online. Some kid from Thailand just wrote, "You're the reason I studied Jeet Kune Do." But one particular post struck a deeper chord. Quietly browsing the internet one night, Jason came across a comment that simply read, "Jason Scott Lee gave Bruce a soul." That performance changed me. That was the moment. Quiet, unexpected, and deeply personal that compelled Jason to finally speak up about what it truly cost him to play Bruce Lee. Playing Bruce Lee was the biggest challenge of my life. In a recent, rare, and deeply emotional interview with Yahoo Entertainment, Jason Scott Lee opened up for the first time about the profound personal toll of portraying Bruce Lee, a story he had kept mostly to himself for more than 30 years. Playing Bruce Lee was the biggest challenge of my life, he admitted, his voice weighted with reflection. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't even about martial arts. It was about confronting all the parts of myself I doubted, all the fears I had about who I might become, or who I might never become. The role demanded more than physical training or mental focus. It required total transformation. In preparation, Lee trained intensively with Jerry Potit, fully immersing himself in the philosophy and discipline of Jeet Kune Do. I wasn't just learning how to fight, he explained. I was learning how to feel. Jerry used to say, "Don't fight the man, read him." That changed everything, not just in combat, in life. Despite the rigorous training and growing skill, Lee often found himself engulfed in doubt and isolation. I remember sitting alone in my hotel room after a long shoot, just staring at my reflection in the mirror, he recalled. I'd whisper to myself, "They picked the wrong guy. I'm not Bruce Lee." His eyes welled with memory. I wasn't just afraid of failing Bruce. I was afraid of failing myself. The emotional demands of the film occasionally overwhelmed him. There was one scene where I had to completely break down, he said quietly, and something in me just cracked open. At that moment, I wasn't acting anymore. I was grieving for the boy who had spent his whole life feeling like he was never enough. Even after filming ended, the weight of the role lingered. You don't just walk away from playing Bruce Lee, he said. You carry him with you. You carry the questions he asks about identity, about strength, about truth. I wasn't ready for that. but I think deep down, that's exactly why I said yes. And yet, once the lights faded and Dragon hit theaters, Jason Scott Lee was suddenly seen as something Bruce never wanted to be. A commodity. From martial arts to mindfulness. After Dragon, the Bruce Lee story became both a critical and commercial success. Jason Scott Lee was suddenly one of Hollywood's most sought-after rising stars. Studios were calling, offers were pouring in. He had the attention of major producers, directors, and executives across the industry. But instead of using that moment to launch himself into blockbuster fame, Jason made a series of choices that baffled the industry and sent him down a quieter, more unconventional path. At one point, his name was attached to multiple high-profile roles in major films. Action thrillers, science fiction blockbusters, and studio tentpoles lined up on his desk, including films that would eventually become household names. These were the kinds of roles that transformed actors into global stars. But something inside him resisted. He didn't feel drawn to scripts filled with explosions, guns, and one-dimensional heroism. Hollywood wanted muscle, speed, and spectacle. Jason wanted depth. He had just spent years immersing himself in the emotional, philosophical, and physical complexity of Bruce Lee. That journey had changed him. It had stripped away surface-level performance and exposed the inner toll of greatness. The industry, on the other hand, wanted the opposite. Characters who didn't cry, didn't hesitate, and didn't question. Jason wasn't interested in playing those roles. He didn't want to erase everything he had learned just to fit back into a predictable mold. Even as other Asian actors began making waves, Jackie Chan with his unique brand of physical comedy, and Jet Li with his stoic discipline and control, Jason felt there was little space for someone like him. He didn't match the industry's narrow image of what an Asian male lead should be. He wasn't lighthearted enough for comedy. He wasn't polished enough for action fantasy. He was emotionally grounded, unpredictable, and deeply reflective. Hollywood, at the time, didn't know what to do with that. Rather than fight to squeeze into a box that never fit him, Jason chose to step away. Not out of anger or disillusionment, but out of clarity. He realized that chasing roles just to stay relevant would cost him something far greater than fame. It would cost him himself. So he walked away from the spotlight and returned to Hawaii. Back home, he reconnected with land, family, and simplicity. He found peace in the rhythms of daily life. Farming, waking early to watch the sunrise, planting and harvesting food with his own hands. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't global, but it was real. And in those quiet moments, he felt something deeper. The physical awareness and control that had once been sharpened through martial arts were still alive in his body. Every movement, lifting, bending, cutting, carried echoes of the discipline he had once used to become Bruce Lee. That structure never left him. More than just muscle memory, it was a philosophy, one that had been passed to him by Jerry Potit, and ultimately from Bruce himself. Jason had come to understand that Jeet Kune Do wasn't merely about fighting, it was about responding with awareness, being fully present, and never acting from ego or fear. Those lessons had shaped him as a martial artist and actor. Now, they shaped him as a father. Instead of training his children in a studio or dojo, he integrated those values into everyday life: patience, attentiveness, discipline, and mindfulness. He taught them to listen before acting, to move with intention, and to recognize the value of silence. Jason Scott Lee may have turned down some of Hollywood's biggest opportunities, but he didn't turn his back on meaning. What he chose instead was a different kind of legacy, one rooted in truth, balance, and quiet strength. What do you think about Jason's decision to play Bruce Lee? Feel free to share your comments with us in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.